Recently, we picked up this 2-litre Mk4 Golf for the new daily. The car cost me 2,200 in AUD. This car has 8 months rego, so it was bound to have some issues. For starters, we have some pretty bad front end damage. Luckily, I have some spare bumpers, but we also have some pretty bad quarter panel damage on this side. Obviously, it looks like they've grazed onto something and then rolled the whole entire quarter panel, and it's pretty wavy, so that's gonna need some fixing. This car also spent majority of its life on the beach, so sadly, we have some pretty typical Mk4 rust here. Hopefully we can get around to fixing that too. Now, under the bonnet, we have some sad fluids in here. The coolant is pretty damn clear, so it's either water or some pretty old coolant. The oil is dark, the power steering fluid is pretty dirty, and also the brake fluid. So it needs a good change of all fluids. But otherwise, everything looks pretty much how it came from factory. There's not really much in here, modified or aftermarket. There doesn't seem to be too crazy of any oil leaks or anything like that, so I'm pretty happy with that. In terms of the interior, it is pretty damn clean in here. The seats are still really nice condition. The car is actually pretty nice. There's no play in the shifter, or at least not much at all. But what is quite annoying is this saggy roof liner. So we gotta get ahead and replace that, because every single time I hop into this car, it sits on top of my head and it gets pretty annoying. Now, other than having quite a few annoying issues, this car only has 188,000 kilometers on it. It has nice cruise control, which is awesome for a daily compared to the Polo, which doesn't. We've got a nice 5-speed manual gearbox and some nice 2-litre sport trims, which I think is pretty nice. And I think it's a pretty good buy, especially seeing as my previous 2-litre had 360,000 kilometers on it and was still driving with no issues. So this thing should last me quite some time. Now, Harley and I expect to take this 2-litre Mk4 Golf all the way down to Sydney, which is about 4 hours away from here. And I'd like to at least do an oil change so we can trust it to do that for us, because we're going to be picking up some relatively big parts for our cars, including for the GTI and Harley's BMW, because recently he cracked his rear subframe. So we're gonna probably pick up another one of those. So let's get on to doing some servicing and jack this thing up. Alrighty, so it's just started raining. I'm sorry if you can't quite hear me as good, but it should be okay. But we're about to go drain this oil, and I'm hoping it's not too bad. There's at least, I know it's probably gonna be dark, but I'm hoping there's not going to be any metal shards in it.
Hopefully no metal chunks.
Yeah, like the GTI did. No, I think we're chilling. Perfect. It's not too bad. Okay, so whilst it's draining, I usually just like to clean the drain plug off with some brake cleaner, so the drain plug's nice and clean. But yeah, got to take the oil filter off after the oil is drained, and then we can throw everything back together, top it up with oil, hopefully it goes well. I reckon that oil filter is going to be messy though. It's always messy because it's like this, mounted like this. Horrid. And it has oil lines, AC lines in the way. Always get oil. Are you zooming up on my face? You're a fuckhead. Alrighty, all the oil is now out. It's pretty damn dark, but it's not, I don't know, there's nothing really any issue with the oil. It's just dark, so it hasn't been replaced in a bit, and luckily we're going to be putting some new oil in it, so we've got to do that. But before we can take the oil filter off, I noticed that this thing has the factory under tray, which is pretty damn rare. I haven't seen a Mk4 Golf with an under tray in a long time, so we got to take that off. I think it's just a couple of torque screws, and then we can pull that off, take the oil filter off, replace it out. Crusty. Not gonna lie, I know it's rare, but I'm never putting that shit back on. I hate having to take covers off just to do an oil change. It just makes it more accessible, you know? And it always hides the oil leaks. You want to be able to see if your car is leaking oil. Alrighty, oil filter is now off. I can tell you guys right now, whoever did that oil filter prior either didn't have any experience or was like an apprentice mechanic, because that thing was extremely tight. We didn't film it, me struggling at least, but I was there trying to wrench that thing off with an actual tool to get that off. It was extremely tight. That's why you only need to do it like hand tight, because the motor itself, when you start it up, it actually tightens the oil filter up, so you don't need to do it extremely tight at all. Anyways, it's off now, so we'll clean the surface off with some brake cleaner and a rag, and then throw in the new filter, fill it up with oil, and we're all good. Now I do have a new oil cooler on its way, but I guess I'll do that next time for an oil change. Alrighty, so we have a new oil filter to go on. This is a OEM man filter, so I don't really like to go with anything else because usually a lot of the other aftermarket ones have a restriction valve inside the oil filter, and that's not good for oil circulation on these motors. Alrighty, I'm just going to pre-fill the oil filter just a tiny little bit, not too much because most of it will probably fall out. Alrighty, that should be enough. And the oil just here, just so it gets a good seal. You don't necessarily need to, but I like to put some around the O-ring seal as well, just so we get a good snug fit. But remember, when you're putting the new oil filter on, you only need to do it hand tight. Don't do it any tighter than that. That's it. That's all you need to do. Hand tight, no tighter than that. Alrighty. Just cleaning it off. We'll also go ahead and snug up the drain bolt. Just a little crank that only needs to be hand tight too because it has a crush washer on it. And then we can go ahead and get this thing back on the ground. My arse is showing. All right, ready? Now it's back on the ground and we have a nice level surface to fill it up with oil. Man, I'm tired. It's fucking warm today. 5 litres here, it shouldn't need all of it, but we'll fill up 4 litres and then check the dipstick. Alrighty, so we'll go ahead and check the dipstick now. Usually it'll go down pretty quickly, so just wipe it off. I like to wipe it off the first time and then we'll go ahead and measure. So put it back in, check it out. So just right here, it should be about there. So we'll chuck a little bit more oil in it and then start it up. And then that should suck all the oil through the oil filter and the rest of the oil galleries. And then we will probably have to top it up just a little bit more. So we'll just start it up for a couple of seconds, let it run just to get the oil all through it. Even if it does have a little bit less oil in it, it's not gonna hurt it if it's running like this, so yeah. Alrighty, so we waited for it to go down again. We'll just check the oil level again. It would have crawled up the oil dipstick when we started it up, so gotta wipe that off. Alrighty, we're about halfway on the actual indicator mark, so we'll throw in a little bit more oil and then that's pretty much an oil change. That's it. That's all we need to do. Now, the only other thing that I could do on this thing at the moment with the time that we have left is a brake booster hose. Now, normally on these cars, you can see it right here. It's also been changed out, or at least just, I don't know, sort of bodged up a little bit. But it's a very common issue, especially even on the 1.8Ts where they're right here, right next to the intake manifold, and usually they're just a thin plastic pipe. They always split and crack in like a million different places, and that causes a vacuum leak, which makes your idle really bad. So I've noticed on this car, the idle is a bit weird sometimes, and that's really the only main vacuum leak that can be on these sort of engines, because there's not much really going on. So, and the fact that this has been bodged up with a bunch of clamps and other crap, I reckon there's a good chance that it's leaking. Even if you can't really see the crack, it makes a big difference. So I picked up a new hose the other day, so I've replaced this and done this specific hose on all my other cars, including the Polo, the GTI, and all my other Golfs. So we'll go ahead, replace this out. You only need about a meter, maybe a bit less to be honest, and we'll be able to do the whole entire thing. So we'll go ahead, disconnect it from the back of the intake manifold, just right here. I'll just move the throttle cable out of the way, but you should be able to just sort of pull it off if it's not too tight, which it might be. So you've got to bust the clamps open and then you can pull that off. Okay, that end is off. You can see here the thin plastic hose that they use, and this just gets really brittle and cracks, and that just isn't good for vacuum. You don't want it to collapse, you don't want it to be cracked, because otherwise it's just gonna have a really bad idle, And in this case, my fuel economy is pretty bad. So well, it seems like it was holding pressure. I don't know if you guys heard that, but all the pressure out of the brake booster just came out. So it was probably holding, but just to save myself later in the future and just as preventative maintenance, I guess. Alrighty. Look at this thing. It's been bodged up a few times, as you guys can see. The only thing we need out of this whole thing, you don't necessarily need this part here, which is like just a 90 degree, but we also have a check valve. Now, if it isn't the hose itself having issues, sometimes these can crack as well and cause your idle to have some issues too. So it's good to replace these out, but seeing as it was holding pressure, I think this is okay. So we'll chuck this back on and I'll put the new hose in. So let's go ahead and do that. Alrighty, so we got our 90 degree, and then we just need to get these other hose clamps off. Honestly, if you get the right type of hose, man, I'm sweating. Can you see that? Like the sweat dripping off my face.
Looking shiny.
Oh man, it's hot today. Alright, so if you get the right size of hose, and as you can see, it's pretty damn tight, but they've used quite big hose for this. If you get the right type of hose, which is made for vacuum, usually you don't really need all these hose clamps. On the GTI, I have a hose clamp on the actual manifold, but the rest doesn't have any hose clamps. And the Polo doesn't have a single hose clamp on it, so, and it's never had any issues. A little trick, I've just cut this off. You don't even really need new oil, but we have some old used oil here, straight out of the motor. And we can just use a bit of that oil to sort of lubricate the ends of this check valve and the tip of the hose, and that usually makes it a lot easier to squeeze these on. So they're usually pretty hard, not gonna lie, but once it's on, it definitely is not coming off. Alrighty, so that's on now. So we have our 90 degree angle, and then we'll go ahead and put another hose on here. This will go into the engine, and then we can split this, put the check valve in between, and then this will go into the brake booster. So that's all we really need. It doesn't really matter about the length. It doesn't really, like, you could just honestly like have this go straight into, with the check valve here, you could just honestly get it straight into the brake booster, but I guess we're doing it the long way and run it against the firewall. So we'll do that. Now, another little quick tip, on the actual check valve, you guys might be able to see it says motor here, and then it has arrows facing downwards. So what you need to do is make sure those arrows are facing towards the end that you're going to connect up to the motor. So let's say this is connected to the motor here and the arrows are facing downwards. That means we need to have the check valve this way onto the hose, and then that way the arrows are facing towards the motor. But you just want that motor side to be pointing towards where it's going, towards the motor, not towards the brake booster. Otherwise your check valve isn't going to work. I actually ended up having enough hose to do this job anyway, so I didn't necessarily need to buy more the other day. It's okay, I got extra, and it's not like I'm probably not going to ever buy another Golf again because I'm a fucking idiot. I'll go ahead, route this down behind. Just size it up first so we can snip it. Alrighty, so we can trim that about a couple inches, and then this is definitely way too long, but I'd rather it be too long than too short. So alrighty, so we'll just snip that, this one about here. Doesn't really matter if it's too long, but you can have a bit of delay or extra delay if you had this too long, but really there's not going to be that much of a difference. Some oil in there and some oil on that side, and then we just route it through, throw it on. Alrighty, so just this part on the back of the intake manifold. It's going to be tight, but once we do it once and we've got it on, we shouldn't ever have to do this again. Alrighty, that's on, and then we can route this behind the little heat shield here, and then down to here. Right there you can see the inlet for the outlet, sorry, for the brake booster. Just like that. I'll try to get it on it as much as I possibly can. And that should be enough. Connect this throttle cable back up again. And that's it. Let's start this thing up and see if it idles okay. That seems to be it. It's idling pretty good. Alrighty, well that's an oil change and the brake booster done. Let's go take this thing for a test drive. Alrighty, so we're on the test drive in the 2 litre. The car is driving nice and good. The brakes are working really well and we have no more messy idle, which is really good. I'm glad that brake booster hose did its job. And yeah, I'm pretty confident in taking this car down to Sydney to pick up some things that are rather large for Harley's car and my car. So if you want to see that, make sure to subscribe down below and let me know your favorite part of the video was down in the comments. And as always, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace. Did it. Good job.